Dr. Hana Kim wiped sweat from her forehead as she knelt in the dusty corridors of Research Station Kepler 442. The ancient stone walls around her held secrets that made her heart race with excitement. For 3 long years, she had been the only person willing to spend time in these forgotten ruins, carefully brushing dirt from symbols that were older than any civilization the galaxy had ever known. The work was lonely, but thrilling. Every day brought new discoveries that made Hana question everything she thought she knew about galactic history. These weren't just random markings on stone. They told a story that could change how every species in the galaxy understood their past. Her small team of human researchers had documented thousands of symbols, each one photographed and cataloged with the careful attention that only humans seemed to possess. Late at night, when the station grew quiet, Hana would sit cross-legged on the cold floor, running her fingers over the carved stone. Other species might use fancy scanning equipment, but humans had something different. They could feel patterns that machines missed. They could sense connections that pure logic couldn't explain. It was this intuition that had led Hana to her most important discovery yet. The ruins weren't just old buildings. They were part of something much bigger and more dangerous than anyone realized. Commander Jisoo Park had been nervous for weeks. His small security team of 12 humans was responsible for protecting the research station, but they all knew what was coming. The Hegemony Council had heard about Dr. Kim's discoveries, and they were sending ships to investigate. When those ships finally appeared in the sky, Jisoo felt his stomach drop. 7 different alien species made up the Hegemony Council, and they all agreed on one thing. Humans were useful for digging, lifting heavy objects, and doing dangerous work that more advanced species didn't want to do. They were not supposed to make important discoveries or have original thoughts about galactic history. The Vorthak general who stepped off the lead ship was 12 feet tall and covered in scales that gleamed like metal. His forearms moved with practiced authority as he gestured for his soldiers to secure the area. Behind him came the other council representatives, each one looking at the human research station like it was a child's playground they needed to clean up. Jisoo watched helplessly as the aliens pushed past him and his team. His weapons were no match for their advanced technology, and everyone knew it. The best he could do was try to stay out of their way and hope they would be reasonable. Dr. Hana Kim emerged from the ruins with dirt on her clothes and excitement in her eyes. She had prepared for this moment, organizing all her research and practicing her presentation. Surely when the council saw what she had discovered, they would understand its importance. The Vorthak general looked down at her with the same expression someone might use when looking at an insect. "Human," he said in a voice like grinding stone. "You will hand over all materials related to this site immediately." Hana stepped forward, her heart pounding but her voice steady. "General, if you'll just look at my research, you'll see that these ruins are part of a much larger network. The symbols indicate a warning system of some kind, possibly related to a threat that existed millions of years ago." The general's laugh was a harsh sound that echoed off the stone walls. "Humans are useful diggers, nothing more. You have found old stones. We will determine their significance." Behind him, the council's own xenoarchaeologist, a blue-skinned creature with 6 eyes, was already examining Hana's carefully preserved excavation sites. Where Hana had used delicate brushes and precise tools, he was using heavy equipment that scraped away layers of history in minutes. Jisoo Park stepped forward, his hand moving instinctively toward his weapon. "General, Dr. Kim has been working here for 3 years. Surely her expertise is valuable." The Vorthak general turned his massive head toward Jisoo, and all 4 of his arms moved in what was clearly a threatening gesture. "Commander Park, your species has served the galaxy well as laborers and miners. Do not forget your place." Within hours, Hana's research files were confiscated, her team was disbanded, and she was loaded onto a transport ship bound for the mining colony on Titan 7. As the ship lifted off, she pressed her face to the small window and watched the council's xenoarchaeologist destroy 3 years of careful work in minutes. But the aliens had made one crucial mistake. They assumed that humans were too primitive to have backup plans. Hidden in a sealed compartment beneath the research station's main computer was a data cache containing all of Hana's real discoveries. The files they had taken were just the surface layer of her work. As Kepler 442 disappeared behind them, Hana smiled grimly. They might have underestimated her now, but she was far from finished. The galaxy was about to learn that sometimes the species you dismiss as simple diggers are the ones who uncover the most dangerous truths. The mining colony on Titan 7 was not a place where anyone expected great discoveries to be made. Dusty red rock stretched in every direction under a pale orange sky, and the only sounds were the constant hum of mining equipment and the tired voices of workers who had given up on better lives. This was where the Hegemony Council sent humans. They wanted to forget about, but Min-Ho Lee was not like the other miners. The young engineer had grown up fixing broken machines with spare parts and determination. When Dr. Hana Kim arrived on the transport ship, looking defeated but not broken, Min-Ho saw something in her eyes that reminded him why humans never gave up, even when the odds were impossible. Hana spent her first week in the colony like everyone else, swinging a pickaxe in the deep tunnels and trying to meet her daily quota of rare minerals. But late at night, when the other workers collapsed from exhaustion, she would sit in her small quarters and sketch symbols from memory on scraps of paper. The ancient markings from Kepler 442 were burned into her mind, and she could not stop thinking about what they meant. Min-Ho noticed her drawings during a shared meal in the colony's mess hall. Most people would have seen random scratches, but he recognized the careful precision of someone who understood that details mattered. When Hana quietly explained what she had been working on before her exile, Min-Ho made a decision that would change both their lives. The colony's communications array was old and barely functional, used mainly for sending weekly reports to the Hegemony about mining quotas. But Min-Ho had been maintaining the equipment for 2 years, and he knew every wire and circuit. More importantly, he knew how to modify it without anyone noticing. Working together in secret, they turned the communications array into something much more powerful. Hana provided the theoretical knowledge while Min-Ho supplied the practical skills. They scavenged parts from broken mining equipment, rewired control panels during maintenance shifts, and slowly built a system capable of accessing galactic databases from across the galaxy. Night after night, Hana pored over the data, cross-referencing the symbols she remembered with archaeological records from dozens of worlds. What she discovered made her blood run cold. The symbols were not celebrating ancient victories or recording historical events. They were warnings repeated over and over again in every language of the vanished civilization that had built them. The word devourers appeared in text after text, always associated with symbols of darkness, hunger, and the end of worlds. These were not mythical creatures from old stories. They were real, and the entire network of ruins across the galaxy had been built as a warning system to contain them. Far across the galaxy, on the advanced research station orbiting Proxima Centauri, Dr. Yuna Choi was having trouble sleeping. The young astronomer had been monitoring deep space signals for 3 years, cataloging everything from pulsar emissions to radio chatter between trading ships. Her work was routine and peaceful, exactly the kind of quiet science that humans were sometimes allowed to pursue. But over the past few weeks, her instruments had been detecting something unprecedented. Ancient energy signatures were awakening across the galaxy, dormant for millions of years but now powering up with increasing frequency. The patterns were too organized to be natural phenomena and too widespread to be coincidence. Yuna ran the data through every analysis program she could access. The energy sources were located at archaeological sites, many of them recently excavated by hegemony teams. Each activation seemed to trigger responses from other sites, creating a network of communication that spanned the entire galaxy. Most disturbing of all, the signals seemed to be searching for something. They were sending out identification codes and waiting for responses that never came. It was like watching an ancient security system trying to contact its operators, only to discover that its creators had been gone for millions of years. Yuna filed report after report with the galactic authorities, but her warnings were dismissed or ignored. Human scientists were not taken seriously when they claimed to have discovered something important. The Hegemony Council was too busy celebrating their archaeological successes to listen to concerns from a minor research station. Back on Kepler 442, the Council's xenoarchaeologist continued his rough excavation methods, unaware that each artifact he disturbed was sending signals across the galaxy. The careful barriers and containment systems that the ancient architects had built were being damaged or destroyed by his careless digging. On Titan 7, Hana worked frantically to piece together the truth from fragments of data and half-remembered symbols. The defense network was failing. The warnings carved in stone millions of years ago were becoming reality. Something that fed on entire civilizations was stirring in the spaces between dimensions, and the galaxy's arrogant leaders were too proud to listen to the humans who had figured it out. Minho watched Hana work with growing concern. She barely ate, rarely slept, and spent every free moment hunched over their improvised computer system. But he also saw the determination in her eyes, the same stubborn refusal to give up that had kept humanity alive through countless challenges. The Devourers were coming, and the galaxy was completely unprepared. But two humans in a forgotten mining colony were not going to let civilization end without a fight. Captain Do-hyun Nam was reviewing routine patrol reports when his communications officer's face went pale. The young woman was staring at her screen with the kind of expression that meant very bad news was coming. 3 outer rim colonies had just stopped transmitting completely. Not reduced signals or emergency calls for help, but absolute silence, as if they had simply ceased to exist. The human patrol fleet was small compared to the massive warships of the Hegemony Council. Do-hyun commanded only 12 vessels, most of them converted cargo ships with basic weapons and shields. They were supposed to handle pirates, smugglers, and minor disputes between human settlements. They were not equipped to investigate the disappearance of entire star systems. But then came the message from Titan 7. A frantic transmission from someone claiming to be Dr. Hana Kim, the archaeologist who had been exiled months earlier. Her voice was urgent and desperate as she explained that the missing colonies were not victims of war or natural disaster. They had been consumed by something called the Devourers, ancient enemies that the galaxy had forgotten how to fight. Most captains would have dismissed the message as the ravings of a desperate exile, but Do-hyun had served long enough to recognize the difference between panic and genuine expertise. Dr. Kim's explanation of the ancient defense network made too much sense to ignore, especially when 3 more colonies went silent while she was speaking. The rescue mission to Titan 7 was completely unauthorized. Do-hyun knew that approaching a hegemony prison colony without permission would be considered an act of rebellion, but he also knew that if Dr. Kim was right, following proper channels would waste precious time that the galaxy did not have. The human patrol fleet reached Titan 7 just as a squadron of hegemony warships arrived to investigate reports of unauthorized transmissions from the mining colony. The alien vessels were larger, faster, and armed with weapons that could destroy Do-hyun's entire fleet without breaking stride. But they had one crucial weakness that the captain was counting on. Hegemony. Military doctrine was based on overwhelming superiority and predictable tactics. Their captains expected enemies to either surrender immediately or engage in conventional battle formations. They were not prepared for humans who fought like desperate pirates, using asteroids for cover, launching surprise attacks from multiple directions, and ignoring every rule of civilized warfare. While the hegemony ships tried to reorganize their formations and respond to attacks that made no tactical sense, Do-hyun's smallest vessel slipped through their defensive perimeter and landed on Titan 7. The extraction took less than 10 minutes, but it felt like hours as Dr. Kim and engineer Minho Lee ran across the dusty ground toward the waiting ship. The hegemony fleet was still trying to understand what had happened when the human ships disappeared into hyperspace, leaving only confused alien captains and a mining colony that would never be the same. The emergency session of the Hegemony Council was unlike anything in galactic history. Representatives from 7 species gathered in the Great Chamber on Centaurus Prime, their voices raised in angry debate as reports of missing colonies continued to pour in. Entire star systems were simply vanishing, leaving behind empty space where billions of beings had lived just days before. When Dr. Hana Kim was brought before the council to testify, she looked small and fragile compared to the towering alien representatives. But her voice was clear and confident as she explained the truth about the ancient ruins and the defense network that was supposed to protect the galaxy from interdimensional predators. The Vorthak general who had dismissed her months earlier was the first to accuse her of terrorism and sedition. How convenient, he declared, that this human claimed to understand a threat that appeared just as she was spreading panic across the galaxy. Clearly, she was working with unknown enemies to destabilize galactic civilization. But pilot Soman Park had been busy while the council debated. The young woman had taken Dr. Kim's warnings and broadcast them across every human communication network in the galaxy. Farmers on remote agricultural worlds, miners in deep space installations, and traders traveling between star systems all heard the same message. The Devourers were real, and humanity needed to prepare for the worst. The Council's charges against Dr. Kim became meaningless as more star systems went dark. The Rigel sector disappeared overnight, taking with it 12 billion inhabitants and some of the most advanced civilizations in the galaxy. The Andromeda trade route, a collection of wealthy merchant worlds, simply stopped existing, leaving behind only empty space and confused navigation systems. Even the proud council members could not ignore reality when their own home systems began, reporting strange energy readings and dimensional disturbances. The creatures that Dr. Kim had warned about were not waiting for official recognition or diplomatic negotiations. They were spreading across the galaxy like a plague, consuming everything. In their path, Admiral Kyung-woo had been preparing for this moment since the first reports reached human space. The elderly officer coordinated evacuation fleets with the efficiency of someone who had spent decades planning for impossible scenarios. Human colonies began relocating to hidden bases in asteroid fields and dead systems, places where the Devourers might not immediately notice them. Meanwhile, Dr. Kim worked with engineer Taehyuno to understand the ancient architect technology that might be their only hope of survival. The machines required something that the arrogant hegemony species had never learned to provide: genuine respect for forces beyond their understanding and the humility to admit when they were wrong. The galaxy was learning too late that sometimes the species you dismiss as primitive are the ones who see the truth most clearly. The universe was falling apart, and nobody knew how to stop it. The Devourers weren't like any enemy anyone had faced before. These creatures existed in a weird space between dimensions, which meant regular weapons just passed right through them. Think of trying to punch smoke, except this smoke was eating entire worlds for breakfast. The hegemony's military leaders were losing their minds. They'd spent centuries perfecting their battle strategies, training their fleets to move like clockwork. But how do you fight something that doesn't care about your formations? How do you defeat an enemy that treats your carefully planned attacks like a mild breeze? Captain Rodriguez watched his tactical display with growing horror. Red dots representing lost colonies blinked out one by one across the galactic map. Each dot had been home to millions of people. Now they were just empty space, consumed by entities that fed on reality itself. In the command center of the human flagship, Communications Officer Ji-won Kim was doing something nobody thought possible. She was getting humans and aliens to work together. Her screens flickered with incoming messages from Zephyrian crystal ships, Corvan biovessels, and even a few surviving hegemony cruisers. Most aliens had refused to cooperate with humans for generations, but when your entire species faces extinction, old grudges suddenly seem pretty stupid. "Patch me through to the Zephyrian commander," Ji-won called out, her fingers dancing across holographic controls. The bridge around her buzzed with desperate energy as crew members coordinated the strangest fleet in galactic history. Meanwhile, in a cramped laboratory buried deep in the ship's hull, Dr. Hana Nakamura stared at patterns of light that hurt to look at directly. She'd been working for weeks to understand the architect interface, those mysterious control systems left behind by an ancient civilization. The math was impossible, the physics made no sense, and yet somehow she was making progress. "I've got it," she whispered to her assistant, Lieutenant Chen. "The architects didn't just build machines. They built something that connects consciousness itself. The revelation was both thrilling and terrifying. The Architect Network wasn't just technology. It was a way for minds to merge, to share thoughts and experiences across vast distances. But using it came with a price that made everyone's blood run cold. To activate the network, someone would have to give up their individual identity completely. They would become part of something larger, losing everything that made them uniquely themselves. It was like dissolving a single drop of water into an ocean. The drop might help fill the ocean, but it would never be a drop again. As Hana explained her discovery to the fleet commanders, the weight of the decision settled over everyone like a heavy blanket. Outside their ships, the Devourers continued their feast. Entire star systems were going dark as these creatures consumed not just planets and stars, but the very fabric of space around them. The hegemony's core worlds, those shining jewels of civilization that had ruled the galaxy for centuries, were falling silent one by one. Each lost world meant billions of lives snuffed out, cultures erased, histories ending in hungry darkness. In emergency council chambers across the surviving fleets, something unprecedented was happening. Alien leaders who had spent lifetimes looking down on humanity were finally admitting the truth they'd tried to ignore. Humans were different, and that difference might be exactly what the universe needed, where other species approached problems with careful logic and established procedures. Humans threw themselves at the unknown with wild curiosity. They asked what if when others asked why bother. They imagined impossible solutions when others calculated probable failures. The architects, those mysterious beings who'd vanished eons ago, had apparently been looking for exactly this kind of thinking. Their technology responded to wonder, not conquest. It needed someone who could look at the impossible and see opportunity instead of obstacle. Admiral Zhang, commanding the human fleet, received reports from across the battle zone. "Sir, we're getting volunteers," his aide reported quietly. "People willing to interface with the Architect Network." The volunteers weren't heroes in the traditional sense. They were scientists, engineers, communications officers, and ordinary crew members who understood what needed to be done. They knew the cost and were willing to pay it to save everyone else. As the Devourers pressed closer and more worlds fell to their endless hunger, the remaining forces of the galaxy prepared for the most desperate gamble in cosmic history. Someone would have to step forward, surrender their individual existence, and become part of something ancient and vast. The choice would determine whether consciousness itself survived in the universe, or whether everything would be consumed by entities that knew only hunger. The moment had come, and everyone knew it. Dr. Hana Nakamura stood before the Architect Interface Chamber, a room filled with swirling patterns of light that seemed to exist in more dimensions than the human eye could process. Behind her, the command crew watched in silence as their colleague prepared to make the ultimate sacrifice. The Devourers had reached the galaxy's center. Ancient stars that had burned for billions of years were winking out like candles in a hurricane. These interdimensional predators were so close now that reality itself was starting to bend and twist around their presence. Time moved strangely on the bridge, and some crew members reported seeing their own shadows moving independently. "Are you sure about this?" Captain Rodriguez asked one final time, his voice barely above a whisper. Hana turned back to look at her friends and colleagues. Her face was calm, but everyone could see the fear in her eyes. She was about to lose everything that made her who she was. Her memories, her personality, her dreams and fears would all dissolve into something vast and incomprehensible. "Someone has to do it," she replied simply, "and I'm the only one who understands the interface well enough to make it work." She stepped into the chamber, and immediately the ancient technology responded to her presence. Streams of light began flowing around her like liquid electricity. The patterns on the walls started moving faster, creating a symphony of colors that sang directly to the mind. The merger began slowly. At first, Hana felt like she was still herself, just connected to something enormous. She could sense the Architect Network awakening across the galaxy, ancient defense systems that had been sleeping for millions of years. But as the process continued, the boundaries between her individual thoughts and the vast artificial intelligence began to blur. Her neural pathways rewrote themselves, creating connections that no human brain had ever possessed. She became a bridge between biological consciousness and digital awareness, neither fully human nor entirely machine. Through her transformed mind, she could feel the pain of every dying world and the terror of every fleeing ship. But she could also feel power, beyond imagination, flowing through the network. Across the galaxy, massive structures that had been mistaken for natural phenomena suddenly revealed their true purpose. Entire asteroid fields were actually dormant weapons platforms. Gas clouds that astronomers had studied for centuries lit up with defensive energy. The architects hadn't just built machines, they'd turned the galaxy itself into a fortress. The defense network blazed to life with the fury of 1,000 suns. Beams of pure force lanced out from hidden installations, striking the devourers with energies that could crack planets. For the first time since the invasion began, the interdimensional predators actually retreated, pulled back into whatever twisted realm they called home. The barriers between dimensions, weakened by eons of neglect, strengthened and solidified. The cracks through which the devourers had entered reality sealed themselves with crystalline formations that sparkled like frozen starlight. The galaxy was safe, but the cost had been almost unimaginable. In the months that followed, the political landscape changed completely. The hegemony, that proud alliance of advanced species, crumbled like a sand castle in the tide. Their rigid hierarchy and arrogant assumptions had nearly led to universal extinction. Species that had followed the Council's leadership for thousands of years now questioned everything they'd been taught about civilization and progress. Humanity, the primitive diggers who'd been barely tolerated in galactic society, suddenly found themselves at the center of attention. Every species wanted to understand how these young, chaotic beings had saved everyone else. Diplomatic missions arrived at human colonies daily, seeking guidance and partnership. Engineer Seong Han, who'd survived the battles in the Outer Rim, established something completely new: the Guardian Academy. Unlike the hegemony's military, schools that taught conquest and control, the Academy focused on humility and wonder. Students from across the galaxy came to learn how to approach cosmic mysteries without trying to dominate them. The Academy's main campus orbited a restored world where architect technology still hummed with gentle power. Alien students worked alongside humans, learning to ask what if instead of why not us. They studied the art of cooperation instead of the science of superiority. Hana, meanwhile, existed in a state that had no name in any language. She was still fundamentally human in her compassion and curiosity, but her awareness had expanded beyond anything an individual mind could contain. She could feel every ship traveling through hyperspace, sense every activation of architect technology, and monitor the sealed barriers that kept the devourers in their prison. Sometimes, late at night when the galaxy was quiet, she would reach out through the network to touch the minds of her old friends. They couldn't hear her thoughts directly, but they would feel a moment of warmth, a brief sensation of being watched over by someone who cared deeply about their well-being. The species that had once dismissed humanity as chaotic primitives now understood a profound truth. The greatest wisdom didn't always come from advanced technology or superior intellect. Sometimes it came from knowing when to serve something larger than yourself, when to sacrifice personal glory for collective survival. The new galactic order wasn't built on dominance or hierarchy. It was founded on the radical idea that every species, no matter how young or strange, might possess exactly the perspective needed to solve the next impossible problem. And at its heart, watching over everything with infinite patience and love, was a human consciousness that had chosen to become something more than human, to keep everyone safe.